Hi, this is Mr. West, and today we're doing a tutorial video on adding negative fractions from Math-DrIlls.com. Make sure to check out Math-DrIlls in the description below. They have thousands of amazing math resources. So there's a couple things we need to know before we start this video. One is combining integers. And again, I have videos and resources in all these, and so does Math-DrIlls. So make sure to check out those resources if you need a refresher or you need to learn this first. But we need to understand combining integers, and we need to know fraction addition before we get started. I'm going to do a quick crash course on both those things right now. So let's start with combining integers. If you're seeing negatives for the first time, this is the basic principle, is if we have two negative numbers that we are combining together, adding together, then they are essentially going to become more negative. Just like if we add 4 plus 2 equals 6, we're very familiar with that. They get bigger because we have 4, we add 2 more to it, and it equals 6. Okay, we can also think of this in terms of a number line. So if we have a number line here, and we start at 4, there's 4, and we move 2 more to the right, we get to 6. It's the same thing in the other direction. So if we start at -3, and we move 5 to the left, because that's what I'm looking right here, -5, we'd move 5 units to the left, and we'd get to -8. So it's the same principle. And the other thing that we need to talk about is if we have different signs. So if the same sign, we're going to add. If it's different signs, subtract. So if we have +4, and we're going to erase here just a little bit so we can clean this up. And this time we're going to combine with a -3, 1, 2, 3. You're going to notice that the number gets smaller. So instead of making it a bigger number like 7, we're going to go in the opposite direction, make it 1. And if we have a number like 2, you notice how the 2 is smaller than the negative we're adding here for this last example. We're going to start at 2, and we're going to move 3 to the left, 1, 2, 3, and we end up getting to -1 because the 3, which is the negative number, the larger component, is more negative, and it takes us to the negative direction. So same signs add, different signs subtract, and you're going to keep the sign of the bigger number. In this case, the bigger number was positive. In this case, the bigger number was negative, so that is why the signs are reflective of that in the final answer. The second thing I want to briefly touch up on is fraction addition. So the most common mistake I see with fraction addition, if we have 1/2 plus 3/4, is you just add the top numbers, add the bottom numbers. But as you can see here, if we combine these two fractions, we're going to have more than 1. And that's not reflective of that in our answer. That's less than 1. So how can it be less once we add them together? So that is incorrect. The other thing I want you to consider is what would we call the units? So we have halves and fourths add together. What are we going to call it when we're done? Are we going to call it 6? That doesn't make sense. How do those units get smaller? So instead, we need to find a common denominator. And that's what I'm going to show you right here. We're actually going to start with example number 2. In order to find a common denominator, because again, what are we going to call it if we add fifths and halves together, is we need to think about how do we make these into similar fractions. So we're going to create fractions that are the same, equivalent fractions. For example, I could call this 2/4. 2/4 is the same as 1/2. And the reason why I got that is I multiply the top and bottom by the same number, which is allowed, because if you multiply by this, that's really multiplying by the number 1. And when you multiply by 1, you don't change the value of it, you just change how it looks. So 2/4 is the same. We could also, by the same token, call it 3/6, or 4/8, or 5/10. Okay, we could keep going too. We could call it 6/12, and so forth. Now, I'm doing it probably a little too much work right now, but I'm just showing you the process in which we're going to find a common denominator. So then we have this one right here. So I could do the same thing with 3/5. Is I multiply the top and bottom by 2, so I get -6/10. And I get, if I multiply it by 3, I'd get -9/15. And then let's just do one more. So I get -12/20. And you'll notice how I put the negative in the top. That's just a standard practice in math. You want to make sure the numerator is negative if you see that negative out in front. Okay, so which of these have common denominators? Obviously, 2/4 doesn't work because my fraction with the 5, my bottom fraction, doesn't have any combination that has a 4. But you'll notice here, you probably notice it right away, is that we have 5/10 that we can make with 1/2. And we also have -6/10 that we can make with -3/5. So that is going to be our common denominator. Could we use other ones? Yeah, we could use 20 or even 100 as the denominator, but those are too big. It works, but it's just creating extra work for yourself. So we want to use the least common multiple with 2 and 5. And really, you'll notice that it doesn't really matter what the numerator is. It's only the denominator that's important when we're finding a common denominator. So I could have just simply listed multiples of 2 and of 5. And this makes it much quicker than writing out the whole fraction. We see that 10 is the common denominator. Okay, that was a lot of work just to get our common denominator, but now we know it's 10. Okay, so this is, let me get my colors straight here. This is my green one, and this is my pink one. Okay, so I know the common denominator is 10, and I know my final answer is going to have a common denominator of 10. All right, so I already kind of did the work here, but let's just do it again just so we're on the same page. So how did I get from 5 to 10? That's the question. What did I multiply by? Now, you're not going to think of, oh, I add. That's not what you're doing. To find equivalent fractions, you multiply the top and bottom by the same number. So whatever I multiply this 5 by, I'll also have to multiply by this 3. So what do I multiply the 5 by? I multiply by 2. So I also have to multiply by that same number again. It's so important that you understand that these two numbers need to match. Most common mistake I see. So I'm going to make this negative because this was negative. Don't forget that negative sign. And then I do 3 times 2, and that is 6. 5 times 2 we already got as 10. Okay. Now I'm going to erase this just because I just want to clean this up a little bit. So if you want to pause or rewind or whatever, that's fine. Okay. Now let's go to the next one. So I know that 2 times 5 is 10. Okay. But I also have to do that times 5 up top. So I would do 1 times 5 in the top, and I get 5. Now I'm ready, okay? So the easiest part is the denominator, right? So the denominator is just going to stay the same as 10. The tricky part is the numerator, and that's why I was telling you about combining integers, because that's all you're going to do in the top. The numerator is just going to simply be this problem right here, -6 plus 5. Well, I know that the 6 is bigger and it's negative, so the answer is going to be negative. We have different signs, so we're going to subtract. We could even think of it as a number line. We start off at -6 and move 5 units up. We're not going to quite get to 0. We get to 1. So negative 1 is going to be our answer. -1/10 is the correct answer right here. So that's our overarching process. So I hope that's helpful. Let's do maybe 2 more examples and we'll call it good. Let's do one where that's the same negative sign. So here's one. We have -1/2 and -1/3. Our very first step is we want to make sure we get that common denominator. So if I wanted, I could list out multiples of 2, right? That's an option. And then of 3 also. 3, 6, 9, 12. Okay. You're going to see which numbers are the same. And we see that 6 is our common denominator. It's our least common multiple between both 2 and 3. So I'm going to put 6 as our common denominator. Now, this is the process that's next, is how do we go from 2 to get to 6? Well, you can see here it was our third multiple, so we multiply it by 3. So I need to multiply the numerator times 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. -1 times 3, again, I'm putting this negative in the numerator always, okay? Put that in the numerator always. So -1 times 3 is -3. Got my first fraction done. Okay, erase that. Now I'm thinking to myself, what do I multiply 3 by to get to 6? Well, I multiplied it by 2. Also, we need to multiply the numerator times 2. Whoops, got this little, there we go. So I multiply this times 2, and I get -2. Like I said, the denominator, that's the easy part. We're just going to keep that as 6, and now our problem simply is -3 plus a -2. Well, we have the same sign here, so we're going to add. They're going to get bigger together. We're going to call that -5. And we're done. So -5/6 is our answer. Really, once you find the common denominator, it's just like an integer addition problem. Let's do one more where we have to simplify, and it looks like this one we need to simplify for. So we have 6 and 5. Okay, one way you can always find it, instead of listing out those multiples, is this always works, but it may not be the smallest multiple, is you can multiply those two numbers together. The two denominators, if you multiply together, will give you a common denominator. It's not always the smallest one that you can use, but it always works. You just might have to simplify at the end. So I'm going to say, okay, we're going to keep 30 as our common denominator, and we say to ourselves, okay, what do we multiply 6 by to get to that 30? Okay, well, obviously I multiplied by 5. So I'm going to do 6 times 5, and I'm going to write that same thing in the numerator. So 6 times 5 is 30. Negative 3 times 5 is negative 15. And basically just going to keep that sign out in front. And you can look up my videos for multiplying negative numbers if you need a refresher on that also. What do I multiply by 5 to get to 30? Well, I multiply by 6, and I know that because that's how I got my denominator. But I have to keep that number the same, right, in the top and in the bottom. So I multiply 1 times 6, and I got 6. So now I just add those two together. So negative 15 plus 6 is negative 9. Okay, so there are different signs. I'm going to subtract 15 minus 6 is 9. I'm going to keep the sign of the bigger number, which is the negative. Now, the reason why there's another little bar here is because this can be reduced. This is how reducing works. It's like the opposite. If we want to find an equivalent fraction by multiplying, you can reduce the fraction by dividing. We're going to divide by a common factor. Does 30 have 9 as a factor? No, it doesn't. What about 3? Yes, it does. So we do negative 9 divided by 3. That's negative 3. 30 divided by 3, that's 10. Negative 3 tenths is my answer. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions on it, please leave a comment below. And I look forward to seeing you next time right here on Wes Explains Best.